willing. Pastor Doug shared the providential way that he and I connected, and that by itself was enough for me to sense that God was wanting something to happen. And just in our short time of knowing each other, I found him to be a real genuine man whom I believe we can have a long partnership in the gospel. And I've also found him to be as you know, a thoughtful man, a caring man, a compassionate man, and ultimately a pastor. I think any man that wants to put on something like this as a journey for his congregation is a courageous man, but he's also a gospel man. Because the truth of the matter is, beloved, you don't have Christ if you push away unity. The heart of the gospel is unity. We make race the issue that it really was never meant to be. The heart of the issue is the gospel. And if we get our mind, I believe, wrapped around that, I'm not saying it won't be difficult, because good things are messy, right? Marriages are messy. Doesn't make them bad. It just makes this journey in oneness difficult. And it's meant to be. Because all of these difficulties only ultimately lead us to know that we can never trust our intuition, we can never trust our gut, we can never even trust our own minds. We have to trust the Word of God and be obedient to that at the end of the day. So this session is just session one. I'm going to walk a little slow, and if you want to ask questions in the middle, you can. But I just want to begin with some foundational thoughts. And I want to begin by talking about my story. And I won't be long, but I think it's helpful. When I was 17, the Lord began to stir in my heart something of this issue that I didn't know much about. I just knew that I had friends in high school that had problems with black people, and I knew black people who had problems with white people. And I didn't know a whole lot about it, but I just knew it was something that was wrong. Then I went to Tuskegee University, an HBCU, all-black college, and there it only became more exacerbated, because the idea of for me, being at an all-black university began to sort of work in my mind about, okay, what is it that you're doing? Like, what is it, what's the Lord calling you to? But now, at this point, I'm still young, I'm still trying to figure things out. But it's really at Tuskegee, at the age of 19, that I felt this burden, this call to this particular ministry. And from that point on, that's all I've done. All I've done was try to do things that build relationships across culture, modeling it in my own life. Every church I went to, in seminary and after seminary, were predominantly white churches. Worked in predominantly white churches. Was an elder of a pastor of a church with 4,000 people. I was one of the pastors. I was the only black pastor on staff. The percentage of people that were people of color might have been 2 to 3% in the church, but I felt myself called to that. Now, in that process, this book is being worked out, because this book actually was the fruit of a seminar I used to do around the country, and a man said to me, you should put that in a book. Well, I thought, okay, so I put it in a book. 2005, the manuscript was done. So really, what's in the book is really a 2005, with some minor edits, a 2005 book. Hence the O.J. Simpson reference, if you read the book. We'll talk about that later. But in God's providence, it came in 2016, and I understood why it needed to come later. Because in that time, I had experienced the kind of what we would call racism. I'm going to redefine that term, that everybody talks about. I know what it's like to be pulled over because you're black. I know exactly what that's like. 100%. That's not a racial statement. That's a true statement. I know exactly what it means. I know what it means to teach a ninth grader who refers to you as a monkey. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to drive home this is when I'm in high school. My brother and I are at 7-Eleven. These are two incidents. And we're getting out there with our friends. Cops pull up behind us, draw their guns, tell us get out the car. All of our friends are watching like, what's going on with Glenn and Sherard? So our hands are on the hoods and we're like, and the guy comes, you have drugs in this car? Now I was young and I was like my mother, so I had a little mouth on me. And I said, man, you can flip this car over, you won't find anything. Well, come to find out, it was profiled. Well, we fit a description of the car. Well, my brother drove a 1970 brown Nova. I don't know who was driving a 1970 brown Nova. And my brother had all this gold lettering on it. He named it Brown Sugar. So he had brown sugar all over the car. So it's like, okay, I see how this can be a mistaken identity. And so then we drive home one day. My brother and I were coming home. We lived in a nice neighborhood. My parents were blessed, so we lived in a nice neighborhood. Well, the cop follows us to our house. And we get out the car. And they said, what are you doing? And my brother said, we're going to our house. And the cop said, there's no way you live here. Put your hands on the roof, on the hood, and all. So my brother started calling my mother, but the sirens, the light. So my mother came out there, short, 5 foot nothing, but she gave him the business. Now I say all of that because that's real. Like unity doesn't mean we close our eyes to the things that happen. But as real as that is, so too are the stories that inflame issues that are not quite what they seem to be. So you have something like Black Lives Matter that feels like on the surface that it is a helpful movement. But in its essence, it is demonic. It's not helpful to the gospel. And it incorporates or it includes a whole host of things that offend Jesus. And yet there are many African Americans, blacks, who embrace the movement because of what it says, but don't understand that it does harm to the gospel. So that's where we live. And so when this white kid called me a monkey, I was in class and I packed my bags. And I said, there is no way that I'm taking that from a 14-year-old kid and the administration wants to kind of make it something other than it was. So I packed my bags and I went home. So I did what any preacher does when he's struggling and wants to find God in a situation. I went to a Christian bookstore because I needed to buy some books. That was my therapy. But on my way to the bookstore, I'm just milking, I'm going over it in my head. And I'm saying to myself, you're right, you don't have to take that. And then like in the middle of that, almost like the Lord intrudes on my own talking to myself. And he says to me in so many ways, you understand what I mean? So now you're ready. Now you're ready. And the only reason you're ready is because you got to the place when you wanted to quit. You think that you should have no scars in this, but you can't be fruitful without scars. So we can't be afraid of the scars that we're going to get on this journey. There will be some more than others, but there will be many. So that led me to, obviously the book was written 2005, published 2016, and then this idea of Christ Above Culture Ministries. I really, like Martin Luther King, I have a dream. My dream's a bit different. My dream is that the church of the Lord Jesus Christ could be led to a level of unity that demonstrates his glory in such a way that profoundly destroys every social construct that comes against the gospel. That's the dream. But the dream is not a book. The dream is not a sermon. The dream is this. The dream is a group of individuals willing to lock arms and take off all the shackles of culture for the cause of Christ. And if you and I are not willing to do that, this will be for naught. It will be a great session. We can talk about it. and it will be something that will be publicized. But if the fruit doesn't come with men and women who are willing to do what Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, then this will just be an exhibition in a conference. But I pray it's more, because I do believe the way that your pastor and I met was for such a time as this. I do believe that the way he and I met was because God wants to do something and is doing something in this church. There's no way he meets a guy, Jarvis, who knows me as a personal friend, because he's looking, Pastor Doug is looking for somebody to help him with this, and he sees Jarvis pick up a book on the Puritans, a black guy, and say, let's ask this guy. I don't know Jarvis. Jarvis knows me, and we could, when you put all of that together, all of us in here believe in the sovereignty of God and the providence of God. We know that God is up to something. But the up to something is this. Because God never achieved anything without the use and the instrumentation of men and women called for his glory. And this is no different. In fact, this is the chief issue of the church today. This is the chief issue of the church today. If we get this wrong, we get a lot of things wrong. So let's move on. I want to now move on to this idea of what Christ above culture is, and I don't want to, I sometimes get off my notes, so hopefully I don't get off my notes. So let's get with this quote. So what I want to do is equip and come alongside individuals, churches, and organizations to realize and maintain the gospel-centered vision for racial and relational unity. That's the point of my life. It's funny because I go to this school that I'm the headmaster of, and I go to interview to be a Bible teacher. I taught history and economics for a long time, and I thought I just want to teach Bible for the rest of my life. That's all I want to do. So I go, and after the end of the interview, they asked me to be the headmaster. I don't know how that happens. But what's odd about that is that I'm the headmaster of a church who in 1970 a school had to desegregate by Supreme Court ruling because they wouldn't let black people in their school. And now you got a black guy leading a school that so many years ago wouldn't let him in. And I'm going to tell you the most profound thing. I'm at this pastor's luncheon for Christmas, and I meet this old lady, and somebody says to me, she was one of the founding members of the church. And I shake her hand, and I say to myself, she wouldn't have let me in 1970. But I'm shaking her hand, she's shaking my hand. The oddity of how God works and moves. So that's what this ministry is about, and I hope tonight and tomorrow will be helpful. So now, let's get into the real nitty-gritty. Now, I want to tell you up front, I'm going to say some things that are going to shock you. Not because they are meant to shock you, but because I believe they're true, and I think sometimes we've been sort of more carried along by the culture than we like to think. So let's talk about the priority of a shared language. I think before we can move forward in any kind of meaningful way, there has to be this idea of shared language. Now, here's what I mean. The next slide talks about the problematic use of the term racism. So let's deal with this because this is important. If I were to ask everyone in this room to define racism, we would probably have as many definitions as we have people in the room. And yet this is the term that we still use to try to make sense of the division in the church and the world. But this church is problematic. Let me show you how. In 1962, Webster defined racism as this: a doctrine or feeling of racial differences, especially with reference to supposed racial superiority, inferiority, or purity. So that's what racism was in 1962. Now in 2014, it's this: any program or practice of racial discrimination, segregation, etc., a program or practice that upholds political or economic denomination of one's race over another or others. What you see is not just a progression of what racism means, you see a confusion of what racism means. So now when blacks say that something is racist, whites have a different terminology. So blacks will say that's racism. Whites will say that's not. Both think the issue is wrong, but both are defining racism very differently. They see it very differently. And so that's why it seems like we're always butting heads. Because we have this term that to me is no longer useful. And so we'll talk now about the ambiguous meaning and use of the term. So now this word racism, we see in Webster has all these, and you could do more iterations of that. All of these many varied meanings of racism, and yet we still use it. But because it's ambiguous, the use and the meaning of it is destructive. Let me show you several ways we use the term racism that are different in this one day. Racism, number one, as the race card. We all know that was the O.J. Simpson case. Like O.J. got off on the race card. Now, it's not a political thing, it's not a social thing, but all of us know O.J. was guilty. Okay? But O.J. at that moment did something that gave political sway and cultural sway. They issued and instituted the concept of race, which turned the entire program upside down. And that's how he won. He used racism. It was a race card. It was the trump card, right? So no pun intended. It was the card that they used to say, I got you. Because now, if anything is racist, no white person wants to seem racist. So if that's what it is, I don't want no parts of that. So we got to acquit the man, lest we have one more man guilty for something he didn't do, although he did it. So racism as the race card. Then you have racism as this unchanging standard. We've been talking about this. So think about it this way. When blacks and whites think about racism, all of us, if we're not careful, go back to the days of antiquity and we start to define very present issues in the cultural mindset of the 1960s. So now, when blacks say that there's racism, they hearken back, as it were, to days when segregation was real. And that's how racism is understood and defined. And then whites look at racism and they say, well, wait a minute. We don't have any hooded people. We don't have segregated water fountains. We don't have segregated schools or segregated neighborhoods, right? So everything goes back to this issue of when things were what they were. And so now whites say it's not racist because we're not segregated like we used to be. I got black friends. I got black people work with me. We had a black president. You know all the things, right? And then blacks will say, yes, it is. Even though they know there's no segregation, they will define it in a way that feels like it's 1960s because they understand the power is going back to when it was evident, not today when it's not so evident. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So you have this standard that just doesn't change. We're growing, we're developing, the church is moving, and yet we're thinking about race in ways that are still 1960s. And we're governing each other that way. And then you have racism as power. What's interesting to me is that blacks would say they can't be racist. But the truth of the matter is they can be. Because when you define racism as power, when you have a black church that's cultural and socially powerful, that talks negative and puts white folks out, then you have an institution that is acting in racist ways. So they say, okay, if I don't have power, then I can't be racist. Well, what do you mean if you don't have power? You mean political power? You have social power, and you enact racism in your social ways. So what do you mean by power? Oh, you mean I gotta have the bully pulpit to do that. No, you don't have the, if we have it that way, blacks can't be racist. But that's not the key. But if we only see it as racism as power, blacks always get off the hook. Because we'll say we don't have political power, or we don't have social power, whatever the case may be. All of it is just not helpful. So now think about it. All of that, as confusing as it may feel to you, is as confusing as conversations can be about. So now, what do we do when we talk about racism in the church? If we're not careful, we talk just like the world, and we end up just like the world. Which is why churches today are still very much divided. Not because they want to be, but because they talk in ways that keep them divided. So we have to get a language that we share. So Thomas Sowell, I don't know if any of you know who Thomas Sowell is. But Thomas Sowell is basically a social commentator. He says this: with varying degrees of explicitness, these tendentious ideological redefinitions of racism have become so intermingled with the straightforward meaning that the word may be irretrievably lost as a specific, meaningful concept. And I believe that that's true. I believe our problem in the church is not that we don't want unity or racial unity. I think our problem is we're talking over and against each other. So we have very different things that we mean when we talk division and racism. So let me give you this gospel-centered, what I feel is a gospel-centered, culturally neutral proposal for redefining racism. I want you to understand racial division as exclusion. I want you to see it as exclusion. And if I had to sort of charge and challenge your church, I would say, because I argued in my book and I think it's true, and I only speak this way when I talk about it, I would challenge you to begin to talk about this issue using this framework of exclusion. And I'll tell you why. But let's define it real quick. Exclusion is defined as all patterns of exclusion: mistreating, denying, undermining, or treating someone as inferior that is grounded in race or ethnicity. You mistreat, you deny, you undermine, and it's all on the basis of race. That's what we call racial exclusion, or just exclusion. Here is why I believe that term is better. Number one, it does not have the historical tension consistent with the term racism. When you say exclusion, there's nothing we have to go back to in the 1960s that takes us back. It's a different term. It removes the powder keg. So now we're talking about something totally different, something totally defined, and I'll put exclusion in a gospel context later. But it's just not historically laden with all of the garbage that racism is. Number two, it eliminates the false notion that racial division is monocultural or simply a white issue. Because if exclusion is just mistreating someone because of their race, everybody can exclude. And everyone does exclude. So when we talk about exclusion, we're not talking about cultural stuff. We're talking about the real activities of individuals who look at people on the basis of race and make decisions. And anybody can do that, not just white folks. Number three, it shows that actions which exclude on the basis of race or ethnicity can take place in covert as well as overt ways. So now, if you say to a white person that's racist, they may say that's not racist because I'm not segregated. But if you say it's exclusion on the basis of race, that changes the whole idea. Because now I have to look at this act. And now I have to evaluate this act. And now I have to evaluate my heart. Did I do that or say that because of that? Did I mistreat this person deny this person, keep this person out, or make this person change who they are because of who they are. So now it can be the overt things, right? Like pulling people over because they're black. And then it can be the sort of the covert things that we'll talk about in a minute. Things that don't feel or seem, but can be. So let me show you 3 ways you can exclude in the church and probably don't even know. And in your heart. So we're talking about this idea of exclusion. Let's drop racism. Let's talk about exclusion. And now let's evaluate our lives and our churches on these 3 things I'm about to lay out to you. 3 ways you can exclude. Number 1, exclusion by assimilation. Now this one, all of us will probably find ourselves in to some degree. Wolff, in his book, Exclusion and Embrace, he describes it this way, and it's in my book. He says, you can survive, even thrive among us, if you become like us. You can keep your life if you give up your identity. We will refrain from vomiting you out if you let us swallow you up. So let me tell you what that looks like. That looks like a white person walking into a black church and then all of a sudden feeling like they got to check whiteness at the door to belong. Now everybody in the church hugs them. Everybody in church greets them. Everybody in church, shows them all kinds of love. But when they walk into the church, everything about the church screams, you don't belong. So now, the challenge in that reality is this. Does that mean the church needs to change everything about itself? No. But the church does need to ask itself, how do we make changes so that everybody fits, not just the majority culture of the church? Because you can have people come in, love them, and they can leave out of here feeling like they're not a part of this situation. Not because of anything you say or do, but you exclude by assimilation. And I don't mean you, I'm just a proverbial you. You exclude by assimilation, right? They come in and we love you, we love you, we love you. But all the while we're saying, stop, okay, we hit the door, just, come on, man. We clap on 1 and 3, not 2 and 4. Let's just leave it at the door, right? You understand, right? Come on, brother, that's not what we're doing. Now, we don't say that, but everything about what we do can illustrate that. Now, it doesn't mean I or Pastor Doug don't want this to happen. We just haven't thought through enough what it means to actually have the nations come among us. So if the nations come and they can't belong, then we have to ask ourselves, what do we need to change? Anything. I don't know what it is. But it's a self-evaluation and an organizational evaluation. Because people can come in and you can love them. You can be honest, sincere about everything you feel. I remember being at that all-white church. I'm going to tell you, it was a glorious time. It was the toughest time in my life. Partly because I let a lot of things get to me that I have to put on the table. The other part was I struggled with, who I could be in that situation. Like, can I be me, or do I need to sort of, wear Dockers and a keychain that flip, and my breath, did I need to do that, or could I really dress like I want to? And so since nobody dressed like I really wanted to, I dressed like them, so nobody said you don't fit, but all the while I was feeling like I can't be me. They love me, but I can't be me. Now, part of my problem was I lived in my own world and I never expressed it. And part of their problem is they lived in their own world and never thought about how I was feeling. So this is where assimilation, exclusion by assimilation, can happen, and is probably the most dominant way it happens in churches. We love everybody, but you got to be like us to be among us. Number 2, exclusion by, and if you have questions or comments, please just raise your hand. Exclusion by domination. Now, this is interesting. Exclusion by domination. Wolf says this: we are satisfied to assign to others the status of inferior beings. They must stay in their proper place, which is to say, the place we have assigned for them. We subjugate them so we can exploit them in order to increase our wealth, or simply inflate our egos. Let me tell you how that looks. I had some young adults in my church that said, Pastor, we want to go and minister to the homeless people. And I said, amen, that's good. And I said, where are you going? And they said, we're going to go downtown. And so they went, but all the while I'm thinking, why? Downtown is like 30 miles from where the church is. But I didn't say anything because they were excited. And they were doing something in their mind and their heart they thought was useful and good. The problem was, it was what they assigned to that group of people that actually gave them value. Are you seeing what I'm saying? So their beauty was that they were serving someone inferior, and the reason they went downtown is because they didn't have a mind that they wanted these folks to come to the church. Are you with me? So we're going to go downtown and we're going to do the real gospel thing, right? We're going to go to the homeless and we're going to say, Jesus loves you, but you stay under the bridge and not come to my church, because the church is 30 miles away. That's domination. You're treating people with a status that you have assigned to them. And you can do it to them. You can do that as long as they don't come to your church. That's all. You stay where you need to stay. And that's more aggressive than assimilation. But at the end of the day, I want you to think about it this way. When Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492, he came and he did brutal things to the Native Americans. Gave them syphilis, threw them over the water, blew their heads out, and he did a million things. But why could he do that? He first had to see them as less than him in order to treat them that way. He dominated them because he assigned to them a status of less than him. Now this shows its head, maybe not action, but it does show its head politically. We'll get to that later. That's going to be the real power. Number 3, exclusion by abandonment. Exclusion by abandonment. If others neither have goods we want, nor can perform services we need, we make sure they are at a safe distance and close ourselves off from them. It's funny to me how black folks, and I say black folks like I'm not one, but I do that for them. It's funny to me how black folks vote Democratic, or as Democrats. And it's not funny because they vote. It's funny because they vote that because somehow they believe that the Democrats are going to do what the Democrats say they're going to do. So when Democrats want to win, what do? They show up in the black community. Look, you can see it with Biden. When Biden was losing, where did he go? He went to South Carolina, where all the black folk were, because he knew that he could go and sell some goods verbally and just make people realize that's why you're Democrat, because you trust us, even though we don't do anything for you. We trust you. You can trust us. And the same can be said other way. But that's what politics is. I'm good for you as long as you give me your vote. When you give me your vote, I'm done with you. But that's how the church can be. And what we don't understand is that when that political season happened with Donald Trump, and it doesn't matter what you voted, well, maybe it does to some degree. But when that political situation happened with Donald Trump, what it showed was how fractured the church was. And maybe still is. Because now in that particular election, everybody stayed away from everybody. Blacks were over here, whites were over there, and the gospel was in the middle, begging for us to hold it. Because we're believing each side and moving away from one another, believing the hype of them. And then when they get in office, they don't do half the things they say they're going to do. So part of my voting has been, my favorite president is well, I had a lot of favorite presidents, but my guy is George W. Bush. And I like George W. Bush because I like George W. Bush, but I like George W. Bush because he never took himself seriously. He was a good man, and I think the history books will show that he was a better president than people give him credit for. But when you can stand up as the president of the United States and say the internet was named after you because it starts with 3 W's, then I like you. I like you. But he was an equally good man. But what I learned under George W. Bush was that the abortion issue was really just a rallying call for votes. Because maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't know that, abortions went up under his presidency. They didn't go down. They didn't stay neutral. They went up. And yet we vote on that issue. It's a good issue to vote on. I'm not telling you it's not. But what I'm trying to say is we're believing people what they say to us, and then from that moving away from the people we should be loving. Okay, that's enough. Before I get in trouble. I'm going to pause. Any questions at all? Comments, please. Anything? Yeah, go ahead.
Try to put myself in a situation where I'm the minority in the church. Right.
Yes, sir.
And if I profess any Christian maturity, and I feel like I'm excluded, not intentionally, but just because of culture.
Right.
I would expect me to demonstrate grace towards the minority, as much as I would expect the minority to demonstrate grace towards me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I wouldn't expect them to change anything. I would just expect them to love me, regardless.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So that's not wrong. Like, I wouldn't want them to change it.
Right. Well, I hear you. And the only thing I would say to that is, if you did that to your wife, she would have a problem with you. Maybe. Yeah, you know, no, what I'm saying is not. I'm just saying, like, we change in our relationships because we know to make them work, we have to. We know we have to. And the church is a building, but it really is, we're all the people. And so when I see someone that, and I heard that you guys have a ministry for folks that are on the spectrum, that's a beautiful thing. You have that ministry because you saw them here and you said they need something to know that they belong, and you started a ministry. I'm not saying the church has to change its culture. I'm clearly not saying the church has to change its theology. I'm not saying it has to change who it talks about, who it values and extols. What I am saying, we have to look at everybody in our congregation and ask, how can we serve?